Record. Okay, we are now recording. So here's the actual assignment. The assignment is to write a complete arrangement for vocal or single melody instrument, i.e., saxophone, trumpet, flute, violin, whatever, um, plus rhythm section. So basically, what you're doing is you're writing the melody. You have your melody with lyrics if necessary, and then you have uh, parts for each instrument, each individual instrument. So this is going to be done in score form.
So I can use a single instrument to like instead of vocal.
You could,
Like
yes, yeah,
okay.
yeah. It could be a single string or horn instrument. And this is going to be your format. You'll have your vocal or melody instrument, and then guitar, keyboard, bass, drums. Now, I'm not married to the idea that you have to have guitar and keyboard. I'm suggesting that, and we're going to cover, techniques of writing for both of those um, instruments. But for chordal instruments, I'm suggesting that you can have these options. Um, for example, you could have guitar and keyboard, as I suggested. You could have just guitar or just keyboard. You could have two guitars, possibly lead and rhythm, which is fairly common in rock music to have lead and rhythm guitar parts. You could also have two keyboards. Um, you could have organ and piano, for example, or piano and synth. Um, there's some, even though it's not that common, there's some pretty iconic bands with two keyboard players. One being The Band, of course, which had Garth Hudson mostly playing organ and Richard Manuel playing piano, and another being Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band. Had Roy Bittan, great piano player, and I can't remember the other guy's name. The poor other guy, nobody remembers him. It's always like Roy Bittan and the other guy. But anyway, so these would be your options for uh, chord instruments for your arrangement. Um, Bass and drums are a given, pretty much, but you have some, you can play with your chordal instrumentation a little bit. And so this is an example of what your score will look like, and we're going to pull up a MuseScore file in a bit, and I'll show you how to set it up. So you'll have your voice or your melody instrument on top. So that'll be set up, that line will be similar to the lead sheet. Won't necessarily have the chord changes, but it'll have the melody and the lyrics. Then you'll have your guitar part, your keyboard part, your bass part, and then your drum part. That's score order for rhythm section. Standard score order. Okay, questions so far? Okay, moving on. So, some questions to answer. How long should the arrangement be, and what should the format be? There's some um, room for variation here. Uh, so the first thing you're going to have is an introduction of some kind. So this could be, um, usually an introduction is around 4 bars, 8 bars. If it's a vocal tune, it'll be the introduction is almost always instrumental. So it's a setup for the song. Before the actual body of the song starts, you have your introduction. So that's going to be the first element of your arrangement. And then we get into the body of the song. And so you know, at the beginning of um, this class, we talked about form and we talked about different types of form and binary form and simple and complex binary form and AABA and verse chorus and all that kind of stuff. So um, how this, you know, form looks and how much you're actually required to write depends on what type of form you're dealing with. So if we're in the sort of pop world, R&B, folk, rock, etc., what I'd like to see is at least two verses. If we're talking about standard verse chorus structure, um, I'd like to see at least two verses and one chorus. And the reason I'd like to see two verses is because I want to give you the opportunity to write contrasting um, versions of, you know, it's like if you um, write one verse a certain way, you can have some variety in the second verse. So it's not exactly the same as the first verse. So this would be minimum two verses and one chorus. And if there is a bridge or a pre-chorus, that would be part of the equation as well. Okay, so is that clear? All right, moving on. And your guitar player has to be in that position. That's got to be part of it. Here's an example of a pop lead sheet. This is not a score. This is just a lead sheet um, for a Steely Dan song that you may or may not know. If you don't know it, it just means that I'm old. Um, but it's great. If you haven't checked out Steely Dan, hey, check them out. They're great. So here, but you can see several of these elements here. Here's the intro up here. Um, and then the verse is in the wrong spot there. Whoops. This is actually the verse where the repeat sign is. And then your chorus. So this would be an example of the, you know, the basic structure you might use for a pop song. Your verse and your chorus. You might also have, there might be an instrumental section or a bridge. In this case, there's no bridge really per se. There is an instrumental solo section, which is here. You can see it's just the chord changes. So basically the rhythm section, oops, sorry, this thing's a little trigger happy. Um, you know, basically the rhythm section is going to kind of make up their own accompaniment based on the chord changes, and the soloist will improvise on those chords. Um, so that would be what a basic, you know, structurally what a pop song should be laid out like. Except that in score form, you're going to have all the instruments laid out. Okay, so if we're looking at a jazz or related kind of music where we're dealing with that more like complex binary type form, like AABA structure or ABAC structure, most of those songs, like songs from the Great American Songbook, Fly Me to the Moon or whatever, for example, you know, just to throw one out there that most people might be familiar with, um, songs that Frank Sinatra would have sung. Um, they're usually around 32 bars, you know, and that 32 bar form will, you know, usually repeat a certain number of times over the course of the arrangement or the performance. I'm going to say that um, you just have to write one chorus in this style. If you choose to write an arrangement of this type of song, you just have to do one chorus. So one complete A or A-B-A-C um, plus intro and coda or ending, whatever. Um, so, you know, 32 bars is sort of the average. You know, it's very common to see an 8 bar A section, and then that'll happen twice, and then you'll have an 8 bar bridge and an 8 bar last A section. So that's, you know, 32 for those of you that, you know, or stayed awake in math class. Alternatively, if you're using a blues form, blues form is 12 bars. So if you're using a blues form, I'd like to see at least two choruses of blues. So that gets you up to 24 bars of arrangement.
Is this slideshow going to be on the Moodle?
Yes.
Okay.
Or some version of it. I mean, all this information will be yes. I will put,
Okay.
yeah, I'll put these. Plus, I'll put this recording that I'm making of this class on the Moodle as well. So. Yeah, so it still would probably be helpful to take notes, but also the information will be up there. The more ways that you get the information down in the more places, then the better, the more you'll retain it. And here's an example of a jazz, standard jazz song with a standard AABA structure. Now, even though this comes from a exalted book, the real book, um, I would take marks off of this lead sheet just for not having rehearsal letters. This should be A here, and this should be B. But yeah, this is basically a classic 32 bar song form. Here's the A section, first ending, A section, second ending, B section, the bridge, and then a last A section. Okay, moving along. Here's a blues example. 12 bar blues structure in E flat. So you would want to write two of these, and actually this example has two endings, the first and second ending. So this is already set up as a double blues chorus. All right, I'll put these examples up on the Moodle as well. So you can have an instrumental solo section if you want. It's not required, but as per like the Steely Dan example there was that sort of whole saxophone solo section. If you want to have an instrumental solo section, you can include that. And then the last element that you want to have is some kind of coda or some kind of ending, some nice little bow to tie the song together. So actually, I'm just going to go back to the Steely Dan chart here, just so you can see. Um, so here's your verse, here's your chorus. That happens a couple times, verse, chorus. And then after the second ending of the chorus, it goes to this instrumental solo over here. At the end of that saxophone solo, we have a DSL coda. So we're going back here. This is our roadmap stuff, right? We're going back here to the DS. We're going to read down. That's like a verse and another chorus, and then here's our two coda. And then in this case, the coda is just another little kind of mini saxophone solo that just fades. It's just two chords that repeat and fade. But it could be anything. It's just something so that you have a sense of completion. It could be a couple of extra bars. It could be a tag. Something to give us a sense of finality. Okay, so some considerations to think about when you're putting your arrangement together. The first one, and this is a big one, what is the feel or the groove or the style? And so when you're picking your song, you might decide, and this you don't have to decide this, but you might decide you want to write an arrangement of the song in a completely different style than it was originally conceived in. That might depend on whether you're picking an original song of your own or a cover song. But there are some really great examples of cover versions of songs that were completely reinvented from the original and became sort of iconic and almost, better than the original. Um, One example of that that comes to mind is the Beatles song "A Little Help from My Friends." How many have heard the Joe Cocker version of that? Yeah, we'll check it out. Joe Cocker did and he turned it into like a slow grind, kind of like 6/8 gospel blues kind of soul blowout. Um, so if you want to hear a really kind of uh, a great example of like a song being completely reinvented through the arrangement process. Also, just as an interesting aside, if you listen to that uh, Joe Cocker version, a little help from my friends, some of his friends that helped him out on that recording include Jimmy Page on guitar, and Steve Winwood is playing organ on that one. So some pretty classy friends. Um, another example that comes to mind is how many people remember a reggae song from the '80s called "Red Red Wine"? UB40, right? Red Red Wine. How many people know that it was originally a Neil Diamond song? It was like a kind of a folk rock kind of song by Neil Diamond. Um, and I heard the Neil Diamond version later, like way after I heard the UB40 version. And I was like, man, if I heard the Neil Diamond version first, I would have thought, what a lame song. But no disrespect to Neil Diamond, but anyway, um, I just thought the UB40 version was way better. So anyway, so take some consideration to think about what kind of mood, what kind of style, what kind of feel, what kind of groove you want your tune to have. I'm blabbing on a lot here. Um, Another consideration is how would you like to interpret the melody? Sometimes this is something that you leave up to the singer. You might write the vocal melody pretty straight and leave it up to the singer to interpret it how they want to interpret it. Most pop singers and jazz singers and R&B singers are not going to sing the melody exactly as written straight. It would sound completely square if they did that. They're usually going to throw in some little inflections. They might paraphrase the melody, meaning they'll, change the odd note. Um, they're going to throw in some embellishments and some anticipations and rhythmic variations, as I've written here. But these are things you can also write into your arrangement if you want. Um, which is one of the reasons why we talked about anticipations in class. One of the reasons for writing in some of those anticipations, for example, might be you might want the rhythm section to catch them. One of the ways you can kind of create some variety in your arrangement and um, some forward motion is to have some of those hits that the rhythm section plays together. So, some anticipations and rhythmic things in the melody, rhythmic figures that are in the melody that the rhythm section plays as well and catches them. So that's just, something that you might want to think about building into your arrangement. If it makes sense musically. That's always the final arbiter, right? Next consideration after melody is going to be harmony. How might you want to vary or modify the harmony? Do you want to use some chord substitutions? You can throw some secondary dominants in there. I'm not sure if you've talked about those in harmony class yet, but you definitely will, and we'll definitely talk about them here. And reharmonization. Reharmonization, which I misspelled here, much to my chagrin. Um, and everybody gets one extra mark on on their assignment based on the fact that I misspelled reharmonization because I'm completely mortified by that. This should be an O, reharmonization. Anyway, I'm not going to dwell on that. Reharmonization is basically just changing the chords of the song, you know, keeping the melody the same, but you're altering the harmony in some way. Obviously, the new chords that you pick have to fit the melody and not radically change the feeling of the song or the mood or the intent of the song. And we'll talk. That's another thing that we'll talk about in class is some ways to think about chord substitutions and reharmonization. So that I realize that those are things that we haven't really talked about yet. This is another really crucial thing to consider. How can I vary the texture and the dynamics of my arrangement? So these are some examples of things you might consider. Density versus sparseness, soft versus loud, more active versus more open, more spacious. So, you know, in terms of rock bands, you know, I always come back to Led Zeppelin because they were masters of this, you know. Go back to Ramble On as a perfect example of, you know, starting out with sparse texture, acoustic guitar at the beginning. There's nothing, just acoustic guitar strumming and that whatever tapping thing that is going on there. I think it's John Bonham tapping on a chair, if I remember correctly, something like that. And then, you know, so you start off with that sparse texture, and then as the pre-chorus comes in, or the, you know, transitional bridge, whatever we're calling it, the texture gets a little bit denser. You know, the drums kick in a little bit. The bass kind of gets a little more active. And then when the chorus kicks in, then you have much denser textures. The electric guitar is kicking in hard. The drums are kicking in hard. You know, I think there's some organ in there. There's like, you know, so you have much thicker textures, more stuff going on. Soft versus loud, that's an obvious one. Active versus spacious. So you might have one section where the, you know, bass and drums are playing a lot of, you know, stuff, very active parts, and other parts where they're playing more, well, spacious, fewer notes, more space between notes.
If we're gonna pick a song like a Led Zeppelin song, would you want us to transcribe the solos on those?
No, not necessarily. No, I wouldn't worry about transcribing solos.
Okay.
You know, yeah, if you pick a song that's like an iconic song that is familiar, you know, I mean, I would like there to be some originality in your arrangement, so I don't necessarily want you to write exactly what the band played. You know, I prefer if there was some of you in it, but also there's also value in transcribing and trying to write out what somebody else did. So I'm okay with you doing a certain amount of that, a certain amount of just transcribing what's already there. Um, but the, you know, the general idea is, you know, if you're thinking like an arranger, um, you know, as we discussed in the early classes when we were first talking about what arranging is, there's a certain amount of composition that's involved in arranging. You know, so if you're taking a song that already exists, you know, you didn't compose it, but you're going to compose the arrangement. You know, you're going to make it you're going to make the song your own in terms of the choices that you make and what you assign, what things you assign to the different instruments to do. Other questions before I move on? Okay. And this is a one that this is often the last thing you think about. You want everybody to sort of stay awake when they're playing. You know, So you want to make the parts interesting enough for the players that they're going to have a good time playing this. But at the same time, you don't want to be clever for clever's sake. Everything that you write, this doesn't mean it can't be simple. You know, sometimes the simplest thing is the most satisfying thing to play. But you want to have every member of the group feel like they are important and integral to making this arrangement happen. And then the next consideration would be orchestration. So the orchestration has to do with what combinations of instruments will I use at which points in the arrangement. This is related to texture and density, of course, because again, if we go back to Ramble On, we're starting out with just the acoustic guitar, and then gradually we're mixing that with other instruments, um, electric guitar and drums and etc. So obviously the term orchestration comes from orchestra, and this kind of stuff is the kind of thing that of course symphonic writers are going to really think heavily about, because it's like really it's about having all these colors in your palette and figuring out which ones blend well together. It's like, okay, what goes nicely with red? Well, what if I put some blue in here, and if they blend together in the middle, I get purple, right? It's literally that. I mean, okay, it's not literally that, but it's very, very much related to that. It's like, what happens if I have a clarinet and a viola playing in unison? What does that sound like? It's like I'm taking these two very different timbres and putting them together. So it's like if I have an electric guitar and a Hammond organ playing a line together, what's that going to sound like? Things like that. And that's it. Okay. So, let me just see here. I'm going to